Okay, welcome to the Holistic Hive podcast. I'm so excited to really start and launch into another season appropriately. We are starting off in such a big way. We have Shanlee Robertson with us from Encompassing Birth Midwifery here in Utah. And so I'm going to jump in real quick and say that I am such a fan of midwifery birth. I believe that everyone should be with a midwife just because I look at the differences. We'll chat obviously a lot about this, of how you view birth versus how traditional medicine views birth and views labor. So we'll chat about that. And I'm a home birther myself. I had all three of my kids at home in the water. It was wonderful. So we're gonna totally geek out. And so I'm just gonna prep you guys because this is really one that this is near and dear to my heart. And I joke, if I wasn't a chiropractor, I would 100% be a midwife. And so I'm totally jealous right now as well. And so I'd love to hear your journey. Introduce us really to what got you into birthing in the first place.
That is not something most people get to hear about because it is a little bit of a different journey. Mm-hmm. Every midwife that you talk about that actually gets into this and does this for a living, especially in community birth and out of hospital, will describe it as a calling. This isn't something we just go out and we're like, I am looking for a job. What can I do with my life? It's something that kind of hits you up the side of the head is how I describe it for me. The brief version is I was supposed to be in Florida and I ended up in New Hampshire in January. Negative degree weather.
I was going to say, I know that well.
That's not where I was expecting to be. And I got to be present as I watched one of my sisters give birth to her second baby. Mm-hmm. And I got to be the first one that touched that baby and hear her little gasp and put her on her mom's chest. And just my favorite part to this day, and it makes me cry when I tell the whole big story, is watching that moment where you get this little bubble. And any mom that's given birth knows this bubble where it's the baby's on your chest and your partner's right there and you're just in like glory hallelujah moment, and like the endorphins are released and like everyone's happy and you're like, I just did this huge thing and like they're here and they're great. And I watched that and I went, this is what family is about. Like, this is it. And I went home and thought, if I could redo my life, I would do that. And so lo and behold, I redid my life, and this is what I do for a living.
I was going to say, so can I ask how old you were at the time?
I was in my mid-30s.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
So
okay.
I'm kind of a little bit older to find my passion.
Yes.
But it is, I always warn people, I'm like, you're going to ask me at my job, and I need you to tell me when I'm in too deep. Because I will go all the way, and you just have to know when to stop me.
Well, no, let's go there, because I think this is really an important thing that I love these days of calling. We feel that very much in chiropractic as well. And we have a lot of people that change careers to do this. And so I would actually love to go there. Of what is it what would be the encouragement or the words or the advice that you would say to someone who is in their late 20s, early 30s, late 30s, and are going,
this feels right.
Yes, it feels right.
My encouragement would really be like, try it out.
Yeah.
See if it's going to work. There is a great difference between what we call a doula, which I know you've done some doulas on this podcast before, and a midwife. And doulas will get in there, and sometimes midwives start out there and they're like, I do this and I love this and I love helping moms and I love doing all of the wonderful things there, and then realize I want to do more. Like, I want to be in charge of more. I don't want to be so quiet and silent when it comes to the care that I see these beautiful women receiving. And so sometimes that's a great stepping point. Sometimes it's checking out some books from the library and looking into it and saying, okay, do I really like this? Do I really understand how to have this? Have conversations with people. Ask. Call up midwives. I get people all the time. I know someone who thinks they want to do this. Can they talk to you? Can they come to a birth with you? Can they follow you around? Can I follow you around? And my answer is like, let's have a conversation. Let's tell you what that looks like. Let's tell you what this life looks like. It is not for the faint of heart. You are working most of the time in the middle of the night. It is not a 9-to-5 job. You're on call all the time. In fact, I was laughing at myself because I was so excited that this summer I had a break where I wasn't on call. And it's the first time in like a decade I've had a summer break where it's like, I could leave the city. I could leave the state. And it's just one of those things that you have to, it changes how you plan and live life.
I think that's a great way to say it. It changes how you live life because you have to acknowledge this isn't a job. This is something that has chosen me, and I've leaned into it. So then I've chosen it because I believe that's part of the path within this. And I'm willing to sacrifice for this because it helps me like be who I am. It's not what I do, it's what I do. It's who I be,
it's part of who, it's an intrinsic part of who I am. Yeah. And it has been, and it is an interesting development to watch family members kind of get into board and see how that is, and friends kind of get on board and be like, oh, this is more of who you are. I've seen more of your authenticness and who really fits with the lifestyle that I live now.
I love it. So take me through your journey, because there's lots of different paths you can have to become a midwife. So take us through your journey.
There's a myriad of ways you can do it. To start off, the basic description is there's 2 different ways you can be a midwife. One of them that is most common is known as a certified nurse midwife. These are nurses that usually have bachelor's degrees that go on for a master's degree, specializing in midwifery and reproductive care of women. A lot of times you'll find them working in the hospital. They are fantastic, amazing women, very knowledgeable. Once in a while, and I love when I find them, you find some of them that are working at home or out of the hospital or in freestanding birth centers. I really do love them. I know several of them personally, and they are fantastic, knowledgeable women. The other one is someone like me, which is known as a certified professional midwife. We're trained in a little bit different aspects, and how we're trained kind of goes a little bit of a meandering path. The path I chose was to get an accredited bachelor's of science. So I actually went to there's a couple colleges that are accredited with federal, state, making sure that we're doing everything we need to. And you can go through that, and you can get an associate's, you can get a bachelor's, and some people go on for a master's in that, which is fantastic. Part of that is there's a clinical experience, just like you would do with any other experience degree when you're getting a medical degree of any kind.
Right.
And that kind of feeds you in and allows you to experience birth under care and under supervision. Those that don't choose to go through an accredited degree decide usually to go what we call a preceptorship, where they're doing self-study and they're finding out on their own way, and they're going through this path with other midwives or with other people and trying to figure out what they need to do. One's more structured, one's a lot more fluid and loose. Both of them take years. This isn't something you start and in a year you're like, I'm good, I know what I'm doing. This is a year's journey in the process, and even when you finish, you're constantly studying, you're constantly updating your information, making sure you're up to date, make sure you're being safe in practices. And it's really fun. So you have a couple of different paths that you can go, and regardless of how you get there, the right path will speak to you. And I know people that shift their path halfway through, and that's really fun too.
You look at this of going, it's really cool to understand that there are different ways in, because I think it speaks to different learning styles and different ways to experience this. Now, I know we're unique as a state, and I'm okay speaking to our state. We have licensed direct entry midwives. We have unlicensed.
Yes.
Can you speak to those? And I'll even chat to kind of my thoughts of the pros and cons on each, depending on where we go.
There is. We are one of the only states that have what we call voluntary licensure, where you get your certified professional midwife, and you actually go to the state and show, I am certified, I've done this, I've taken these classes, I'm up to date on these certifications, such as CPR or NRP, which is neonatal pulmonary resuscitation, which is different than CPR, which is very huge. And you present those to the state, and then you get a license, which means we have a medical license to practice. We're not medical health providers in the way that doctors and nurses and so forth are, but we have that ability. The other option is you may or may not get that sort of CPM certification, and then you just decide to practice. Some of the pros and cons with that come with how the laws have been written within the state. In Utah State, for example, if you're licensed, you're not allowed to do a breech birth. If baby's coming out bum first, the law states, unless it is imminent, so unless it's like there's nothing we can do and it's coming out this way, that is not something that we're supposed to do. We're supposed to transfer care to another care provider so that they can get additional care. It's different in other states. For example, I'm also licensed in Arizona, where breech birth at home is accepted and is totally allowed. So it's really fun for me to have these really great skills that I know I can use in one place, but I can't use it in another place unless it's imminent. But being able to have those discussions and have that knowledge. A couple of other beneficial things is license means I can carry medications. I can go forth and I can carry a lot of in fact, I do carry all the same medications that they would have in the hospital to prevent postpartum extra bleeding, we call hemorrhaging, to do a lot of different things. We carry oxygen and IV fluids and Pitocin and methogen and all of these things. They're not always my first gate to goal, but if I'm not licensed, I'm not allowed to carry them. I'm not allowed to have them. And so we rely a lot more heavily on the natural and holistic. We're talking about nutrition, we're talking about herbs, we're talking homeopathy, we talk about chiropractic care, we talk about acupuncture care. And it's been entertaining in here with your office, as I come in and I see my clients and for the other doctors, like one of them was like, she's spending over and chatting to this person. They're like, oh, she was her midwife.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, we do this all the time. And it's really fun to see like the natural and holistic options and variety that kind of comes together that we can both encompass, whether we're licensed or not licensed, but there's that dichotomy that kind of separates the two.
So if a mom is looking at a decision between an OB, a midwife, and then we'll even say midwife, birthing center, home birth, all that, we won't go location right now. We'll just speak just a hospital or just OB versus midwife. Is there anything that they can't receive other than a C-section that they can't receive if they're with a midwife?
With certified professional midwives, we also cannot write prescriptions. With nurse midwives, you can.
Yep.
And usually you will run across certified professional midwives that have a relationship with somebody that we can say, let me refer you for that prescription. So there's ways that you can kind of work within that system. But the truth is, other than the cesarean, not really. The World Health Organization says that cesarean rates should be between 10 and 12%, which means 85%, and I'm giving you a nice little buffer between those two, 85% of women are considered what we classify as low risk, which means there is no reason why they cannot birth in their preferred birthing location, regardless of what that is. And that means midwives are usually the best care providers. We spend more time. Appointments can last from 30 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on your provider. We're a lot more educational, especially on nutrition, and we look at women as a whole, not just you're pregnant, and therefore you have a condition. We're just going to make sure that the baby's growing good. Right. But how are you doing emotionally? How are you doing spiritually? How are you doing with your family dynamics? How are you doing physically as well? Do we need to make adjustments for that? I have conversations with my clients all the time. It's like, how are you creative? How are you letting some of this emotional energy out? Pregnancy is a time of transition. It's a big time of change, and we need to have multiple ways to kind of express that change. And so that's really a wonderful part of midwives, is you're not just dealing with a condition, but you're dealing with the whole person and working with the whole person to make sure that this journey is what it looks like best for you.
I think it's really important for women to understand that they have so many choices. When we look at some countries like Finland, Sweden, Norway, that is coming in doing such a high level care.
Netherlands is like,
yes,
I love
it. When we look at
this, there and I'm like, oh, can we do that?
Women survive birth at a very high rate,
yes,
like they should. Babies survive the first year of life at a very high rate, like they should. And what we know common ground is midwife care. And I look at that, of the way that I like to say it, and I love that you say this, 85% of birthing pregnancy is uncomplicated. It's low risk, and there's research that was just released that if you have a low risk pregnancy, normal type birth that you're going into, actually having a planned hospital birth actually may not be your safest option.
Almost counterintuitive.
It is.
Yes.
And I will say that. That's why I will say that, because it's really one of going, ooh, it's a damning statement. My answer is yes. And it should be, because we're looking at birth as a natural approach versus we're looking at birth in an emergency setting. And if we view birth in an emergency setting, we're going to react in an emergency way, rather than letting things work through and say, okay, this is a transition and we're going to work with your body because, hey, this is normal physiology. Your body knows what to do. It's intelligent, it's powerful. And so we look at and I want to come back to why midwifery care is so powerful. When you look at all these countries that are doing so many things right, and their basis for all of them is midwifery care, to me it's the solution in this country to our healthcare crisis, of saying all women that are on, and we'll even just say state-funded care, to me should all be on Medicare, or excuse me, if they're Medicaid, they should all be with a midwife, unless they have to have an OB, and go, that would solve a lot.
Well, the countries you listed really do have that system in place, where you start out with midwifery care, and if the midwife deems that there's a reason, then you move on to higher care, which does a little bit different than what we have here, where we have a lot of wonderful, expensive specialists, and they're handling all the normal things. But yes, speaking to that, it kind of comes into a little bit of a generalization of that normalcy, the difference between it. And one of those things comes from the education. There's a difference between you are educated to catch the problems. I get to see a problem. Therefore, you see the problems. You see every little thing as a problem that could be leading up to something different, which is also very true in our culture of Google check.
Yes.
I have a stomach ache. I must be having preeclampsia because I'm like, no, that's not how this works. Where my education and the education of midwives is, this is a normal process. This is something that happens in life. This is something that happens repeatedly in your life as a woman. This is something that occurs naturally. And we're going to view it as natural, being aware that there are problems, but our main focus is actually on the normalcy of pregnancy. It's on the normalcy of your body working and your body working as best as it can. And it's not saying that we're going to ignore those 10 to 15% that need something more. We just call it moving to a higher level of care. It's that we're paying attention to the normal things, and a lot of the times it is normal. A lot of the times it is a perfectly benign thing. You know, I get texts all the time from clients, and I was like, a couple of questions, and I'm like, totally normal, totally benign. This is a normal part of pregnancy. But there's a difference between a woman experiencing where she's done it once or twice or sometimes 6 or 7 times versus someone like me who has seen it over 300 times or midwives 500 or 700. We just have a different perspective. And that's okay. And that's the way it is. And every pregnancy is different. What happens in one isn't guaranteed to happen again in another. And so sometimes you're like, well, it's my 3rd baby and I never had this before. And I'm like, you haven't, but others have. And you're totally within the scope of like, it's okay. And it's okay to be nervous. And it's okay to like text me and ask and find out if it's okay. Where it's a lot harder to get a hold of your doctor that way too.
Well, and I look at it, makes me think of 2 things. First thing that I love is if you know normal so well, you can recognize abnormal very quickly. Rather than only looking for the problem, it's like, no, I know normal. And we know normal from experience, I know normal from my training, and I know normal how I look at physiology. That changes everything. The second part that you said that I really love is, okay, this is my 3rd, this is my 4th, this is my 10th baby. This is different for me. And I will speak to myself for this one. It's like I had my first birth was right as I was graduating chiropractic school, and had a crunchy, wonderful midwife. And that was I had seen birth, I'd been at birth, loved birth, and it was my first time going through it myself. I had my midwife, did not have a doula. I did not know what a doula was at the time, and wish I did. That's okay, because I quickly hired them.
Especially for first-time moms.
Exactly. Quickly hired them for the other ones. And then my second birth was here in Utah, and I hired someone who was a little bit more businesslike. And I was a little bit more businesslike at the same time. And at the moment, I think she fit every need I had. But it was interesting because in my 3rd, in that pregnancy, it was like, what do I want? And what I realized, and the word that came to me was, I want nurturing. And so...
And it changes.
And it changes. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about, and that you say, is like, each pregnancy is different. And then maybe your needs, not maybe, probably, your needs are different with each pregnancy. And that's okay to put words to them and to voice that and to find that right provider.
Yes, there's a lot of times where providers change for every single pregnancy. And there are times where you find your one provider and they just speak to you. And then you guys find new ways to adapt every single pregnancy. And I've done both. And it's great. And I love getting to know them. And I kind of joke with my we call them clients rather than patients in this care. I love my clients, especially when they go, I want to see you again. Can we hang out afterwards? I'm like, we will do stuff. Like, I am not willing to break this relationship any more than they are. Because you come to know and love them as a person. And that's really important as a woman, getting that connection and having such an exposing experience that is so vulnerable physically and emotionally, to know that you're in a safe presence with somebody that cares and truly loves you.
So I want to speak to that safety. And that presence, because I think that's one of the most important things that we don't realize within our power, is if we bring a midwife into our home that's already a place that we feel comfortable and safe and vulnerable, versus us going somewhere else, there's a difference in that. There's a beauty, there's just an energy about it. And I know a lot of couples are very hesitant the first time. And
it is their safe space. It is their private space. And now you're exposing your private, vulnerable selves to whom, when you first meet them, is a complete stranger. And it's the weirdest thing in the world. Why would you do that?
And so I look at this, but here's the trade-off. And what I'd love to speak to is, I have so many moms that it feels like they had to, and I'm going to say this, I'll say it harshly. It's like they had to have a bad hospital experience in order to justify the chance to have a home birth and have a beautiful home birth. And I go, how can we help? How can we communicate to that if the feeling is, I want to stay home and I'd love to have everyone come to me, how can we support our partners? Because that's normally the sticky point.
Yes.
How can we support ourselves in this feeling of, I actually really like the idea of being home. It feels right. How can I communicate that?
Yes.
Can you help with that?
To start off, partners that tend to be resistant to the idea of home birth end up typically, in my experience, being the biggest proponents of it afterwards. I have seen time and time again where she's like, yeah, I wanted to do home births before, and now we finally get to do it. And afterwards, the dad's like, do you know what my wife did? Do you know what my partner just did? Like, have you seen? She is amazing. And it, like, they tell everyone, they will stand on top of the rooftops and crow it. Like, nobody should ever leave home again.
Right.
And I get a huge grin when I remember those experiences, because I'm like, this is what you were worried about.
Yep.
But we have to look at our partner's perspective. And one of that is, a lot of times they're the protector.
Yes.
They want to make sure that this person whom they finally found and they absolutely love, and this child who their heart is aching for, are safe. And they want to find the safest place for them. So part of that is like, okay, let's find the safety. Let's find that safety net. Let's talk about to a whole bunch of different providers. Let's talk to those that actually are doing it at home and say, what is it that you bring? What are you providing? What is your training? What does that look like? And then consider to yourself, how do you feel when you talk to them? Do you feel heard? Do you feel listened to? Do you feel like they actually know what the crap they are talking about? Because that makes a big difference.
Yes,
there are some people that give you this sense of confidence, and some people are like, maybe not you. And that's okay.
Right.
There's a different person that speaks to everybody. And then you go home and you have those conversations. Look, for me to feel safe and for me to be able to do this, I need you. And for you to be able to do this, you need to feel comfortable with the choices we're making together. And this is where I want to do. Great point of fact is, I don't want to be laboring and in a bumpy car yelling at you because you're hitting every pothole, when the reality is it's just the bumps in the road.
Right.
And then you're stressed out and I'm stressed out and then just all got stressed. Let's talk about how does that actually look. And then ask the midwife. We usually have references of dads that have been in their position before. Like, talk to other fathers who have done home births and have done hospital or have done birth center. Like, talk to that. A great example is the birth where kind of changed my life. They were planning a birth center because he was not comfortable with home. Needless to say, they didn't make it to the birth center. They ended up at home. But they've still, ever since then, they still have done some hospital and some at home, just based on the various experiences and needs at the time. But it was an open conversation. Because they were able to have those conversations. Like, they've had some beautiful home births and they've had some beautiful hospital births, and they've had some great experiences that they always feel like this is where we needed to be when we needed to be there. And it can change. I know people that go back and forth between the two. And you can have a beautiful experience regardless of the location that you're in. It just makes sure that you're listened to, you're heard, and you feel like you can speak your voice. Those are the things that you're actually looking for in a provider. And if at any point during care you don't feel that those things are being listened to by the provider, change providers. We call them late transfers, where you're moving, like you're like third trimester and you're transferring. I've had people do it in like the last month of their care. They're like, this isn't working, I need something different.
Yes.
And I'm like, listen to that, because that ultimately will dictate how you feel about your birth.
I have to go there because that's a cautionary advice that really is important. I want to repeat it, reinforce it. What we now know is that women who feel traumatized in birth, and it could be that the birth did not go the way they wanted, but it could be that the birth outcome was what they wanted, they were traumatized. And what we know is in that traumatization and in that trauma is that if a woman feels heard, supported, honored, then her level of trauma is much less.
Yes.
Even if the birth outcome wasn't what she wanted.
Was different than she anticipated.
Right. Which is so, and I thank you for correcting that because I like that, different than we anticipate. And there's no right or wrong birth outcome. And yet it's that being honored, being heard, being supported. So to me, the red flag is when you are seeing a provider and you ask about episiotomy rates, you ask about C-section rates, you ask about, I would like to labor in shower or in the tub, and so we'll talk about that later, and you get dismissed. You get minimized. You get, well, we'll see what we can allow. Those words to me are disempowering words, and those are super big red flags, like as big as they can get, to say if they're not honoring and listening to you now, they're probably not going to honor and listen to you in the time of labor. And so that to me is when you start going, hold on, let me listen and let me go, I don't feel heard, and lean into that and say it's never too late. I love the advice. I asked one midwife years ago, I said, when is it too late? Because I get moms, of course, that are coming in at all stages. And I said, when is it too late? And she said, are they still pregnant? I'm like, whoa, okay, that's kind of scary. And I go, you're right. At a certain point, it's like, depending on timing and everything else, a phone call can always be made. A question can always be asked. The ability to say, hold on, I'm not stuck on this path that I committed to 6 months ago. And now I'm a different person because I've learned things differently and I've educated myself and I've empowered in the information. And now I choose differently, or I would like to. And the answer is you totally can.
Yeah. And always pick up the phone and ask those questions. That's where a lot of these journeys start, is like, I just have a question. Can you just come and be in my home? And then they get there and going, why would I go somewhere else? And I'm like, and there are times where I get there, I'm like, this is obviously the right choice for you. Like, this works for you, and this is where you feel like you need to be. And that's great. Right. I will support that 100%, however you need it to be supported. But yeah, it is very true. Those red flags of any relationship also apply to a provider and client relationship. It's, am I being listened to? Do I know them and know how they're actually going to practice? Are they actually going to do what I believe they're going to do? Do I trust them to be able to do what they say they're going to do? Can I rely that they're going to keep that trust and keep that knowledge? Because then I can commit to them and know that they can touch me and I will be comfortable with that as it's happening in an emergency situation or a non-emergent situation. And I always have the ability and the power to say no, and they will respect that. Because if you're not listened to and not respected, like you mentioned, the studies come out time and again, that is when trauma is actually occurring. Not the outcome, but how are you treated during the moment that is actually occurring.
I know one of the big things that switched us was we were looking birthing center with our first, and it was, she had bought a home and converted to a birthing center, kind of the typical thing that happens. And then we go home to our house and we're like, hold on, that's a home. And this is a home. and then we realized,
what's the difference between the two?
That's exactly right. She's going to bring everything to us.
Yes.
And I think that, like, just that, it's just, I say it because it was like, that was our, oh, it's really that easy. And so it's like, oh, they can bring everything to us, which means, and that was like, we were in Dallas at the time. So it's like, when we talk about the drive, it was like, oh no, this is
I don't
not.
want to be stuck in Dallas traffic.
Yeah. And I look at that of going, when you realize that you're not giving up any of the life-saving measures, you're not giving up any of the access to higher levels of care and intervention if needed, that all can happen. And also, I believe there's some qualifications within a home. It's like for where you live and things like that. So it's one, I think it's really important. I always like to say, I had to be really healthy in order to have my babies at home. It wasn't that I could not take care of myself and just be like, nope, postpartum care and prenatal care doesn't matter, and I'm just going to show up and you're going to deal with it. It's like, no, you need to be proactive. You need to be responsible. You need to be involved. And I love that higher level of responsibility to say, no, I take charge of my health, and I take charge and ownership of my body and my baby, and that we're doing this dance together. And so rather than I hand it off to someone else, I take responsibility back, and by taking that responsibility and that opportunity is what allows us to be able to have more choices when it comes to birth.
Yeah, and I love how you said I get to be involved, because that is the truth. It's not that a provider is the one that's in charge and gets to determine everything that's going to happen to the birth. It's that you are involved and your partner is involved. And in my practice, your children are involved to the level that you're comfortable with. I have had some beautiful experiences where the whole family's involved and lots of aunts. And it's a beautiful situation, but you get to decide what's going to be best for you and what works best for you. But it's true. I joke all the time. I'm like, I have like a mini hospital in the trunk of my car, and people like lift up my thing. They're like, your trunk is like half full, and I'm like, yes, and I can tell you the purpose for all of those. Exactly. That if I get a call, I am ready to go wherever I need to.
Well, and I love that you even say family. It makes me think of my last, that we had our third. I didn't know what to do with my kids. Like
it's a new experience.
I couldn't make a decision. It was just that indecisive, and of course it normally works out exactly how it's supposed to. I put my kids to bed and I'm contracting and processing and all this wonderful stuff, and I'm laughing because it was so easy. And as soon as I put them to bed and literally shut the door, they're going to sleep, it's like, then it was like, boom, now we're really going to do this. And I look at that, I'm going, sometimes that point of like, I don't know how it's going to work out is really okay too. I'm going, it's going to work out. And my son comes up right after our youngest was born, and I had woken him up making a couple proper vocal sounds in labor, and he comes up, gives us a hug, kiss, so excited, goes back to bed. My daughter comes up like a half an hour, 45 minutes later, and she doesn't go back to bed. And I look at it going, that's exactly, like, it was perfect. And I'm so grateful that in that, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with my other kids. And sometimes it's like, and I even look back now and go, why were you worried? Because kids are so adaptive, and kids are so involved, and they're so loving and kind because they're being raised in this environment, that to expose them to natural birth is a beautiful thing that they may not, like, you look at your experience in your 30s, I look at my first birth I went to, and I was in my 20s with that. It's like, and I look at this going, like, we don't have that exposure. And
it's different.
It is.
It is. I have some funny stories. I love children at birth. I think they're great, and it works for some families and it doesn't work for others. But I have some great stories, and there's great pictures out there, and there's some fantastic moments that I'm like, this is, like you said, this is how it works, and this is great. And that's one of the things that I love in my practice. So my first degree is actually in family consumer science, which kind of deals with the hodgepodge of things, and part of that is family, social, and behavioral dynamics and adjustments, and so I get to incorporate that into my practice, which I love. Which one of the things we talk about is, what are your kids going to be involved in? How does that look for you? How can you prepare these, especially when it's from the first to the second, or you've got a very young one that's under the age of 2. It's kind of like transitioning to not being the baby anymore. I'm like, how can we transition that? How can we help with that? What does that look like? Have you talked to them about what a placenta is? Do you know what a placenta is? And they're like, yes, I think I do,
but I've never seen it before.
But I've never seen it. I was just like, it came out, and I was good with that.
Yeah.
Or sometimes they're just kind of going, yeah, like, we've talked about it. And I remember one little boy, it's like, we talked about him, the little girl was sitting there fanning her mom, and she was probably about 3 or 4, and she was just kind of like this look of like, I don't know what's going on here. And then the baby came, they were all excited, and then the boy just kept watching the water, and just kept watching the water. And the mom was like, we've talked about how the placenta comes, and he knows it's not done until the placenta. So he was like waiting for that finale, and it came, and then we showed him, and he was like, okay, I'm good. Like, he didn't want anything else, he just knew that had to come first.
That's awesome.
And so there's just such a fun dynamic, and every child is different. And it is like, parents are like, should I wake up my kids? I was like, let them sleep.
Right.
If they wake up, it's great, and they'll be ecstatic.
Yeah.
Or they'll go back to sleep. Like, but if not, they get to wake up and they're going to have a brand new sibling.
Right.
And it's one of my favorite moments is also watching the siblings, older and younger, like, come up and meet this new person that wasn't there before, and you get some of the most tender moments in the world. I love families. To me, that's a digression, but I love that.
Well, and I look at it going, I think it's so powerful, the position you get to be in is be in someone's home, welcomed into their environment, and
it is
really
a great
exposed.
honor of trust.
Yeah, and I look at this of going, I've been in practice now 19 years. From the very beginning, I've worked with midwives and say, you guys are literally change makers. It's a generational change that gets to happen. We used to come together as communities. We used to have our moms and our aunts and our grandmas all support us and love on us because they had been through it, and they had supported each other and loved on each other. And then we lost that. And what we're doing is we're reclaiming that. And it's really nice that we may not be that we have mom and grandma and aunts, but instead we have the doulas, and we have the midwives, and we have the videographer and the photographer. Which
I love. I love those too.
And I have to laugh because we're all there just loving being there. And you have a chiropractor who can come at times. And that's just like, and whenever we get to do birth work and I get to go in, it's like, I know it's a tender, special place and energy, and I only want to help add appropriately. And my belief is I come in and I'm like the breath of fresh air is like how I vision myself, because if I'm needed in a birth,
sometimes that's exactly what it is. Yes. We all just need a little bit of a change. And that's where it can make a beautiful change. And I also I very much tune in of going, okay, sometimes I've had a feeling I've adjusted and very much got the feeling leave right now. We're good.
And then I've had others that it's like, and I've literally was walking to a car with one of them, and it, like at the car was like, no, turn around and go right back in. And it was a home birth, and it ended up baby needed some extra help and love and support, and I got to be part of that as well. And massive, amazing miracles that can happen when we get to be part of this stage of life. I really appreciate you being here. This is... We will continue this conversation because we didn't even like barely touch on the things I want to, because I really want to lay this foundation of how normal, how appropriate midwifery care is, And then I guess that's one of the final questions I want to ask for this time. I'm done having my babies.
Okay.
Is there any interaction I get to have with you for future care, woman care? Do you do any additional care, or are you in that
It depends
model?
on the midwife.
That's what I thought.
With certified nurse midwives, absolutely. Like they will continue the care all the way through menopause and do a lot of that things. I do provide some woman care that's allowed within the law. We do talk about contraception, and there's the different varieties that can be provided there. The typical care that you would follow up with. So yeah, it depends on the midwife and it depends on the person. But a lot of us, like, we'll be completely honest, our hearts are there with you as you're in this tender time, and then for someone to be like, and we're done, cut. I'm like,
Yes.
I'm not done yet. I still care about you. I care about your babies.
Yep.
So there's a lot of us that we do various activities. For years, I've had like an annual, like, let's meet at a splash pad, bring your kids, like, my birthday's in the summer. We're going to pretend that that's the reason we're getting together. And really, I just want to see you again.
Right.
And you develop those relationships and those friendships. But with woman care, yes, reach out. Ask your care provider if that's something that you do, or if they know someone that will help with that.
Yep.
Because that is a great way to kind of keep up. And we want to make sure that you're not ignoring your physical body just because you're not having children anymore.
Yep.
Like this beautiful form, these reproductive organs that have done such a wonderful, great, big work still need love. They still need attention. And that doesn't mean that you're just done with them because I'm not having any more kids, therefore it doesn't matter. No, they are part of who we are as women, and they are part of what we are, and we want to do everything that we can to make sure that they are working functionally, the hormones are still talking the way that they should be, and that something isn't going hiccuped somewhere. And part of that is just regular checkups and regular care. And it's always nice to check in with someone that you know that like cares about you, and be like, okay, let's. The great phrase in midwifery care is, once you have a baby, you are always postpartum, and you are postpartum for the rest of your life. And postpartum is something we do.
Yep.
And that means that we're checking in emotionally as well as physically. And it's like, how is this looking right now? Life changes. Kids grow up. But that doesn't mean that adaptation as a mother, as a human, and as a woman doesn't also change, and sometimes need to check in.
And to me, it's we get nurtured through all phases. And I remember hearing postpartum period is forever, and that I needed to hear it. And it changed how I viewed my body, but also viewed this mindset of, well, I missed this opportunity for pelvic floor work, or I missed this, and it's like, no, you didn't.
Pelvic floor work.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, no, we'll go down that path another time as well. We'll bring on. And so I love the idea that this is truly woman care, all aspects, and honoring.
Yes.
And honoring the innate wisdom of the body, that it knows what to do, and we support it. And that's why we always get along so well as providers, because we both believe the body's intelligent and smart and powerful and capable of amazing, wonderful things.
To it, it will tell you what it needs.
Yep. And then we honor that. So thank you for being here. How can people connect with you?
I do have a website. I do have phone numbers. But yeah, most of it's just reaching out. If you have a question, send an email. If you want to, call. Just the phone numbers on my website. It's just encompassbirth.com. And I love it. I get calls all the time with random questions from all over the place. And I'm like, I am here to help and give my information as much as I can. I consult with other clients that are too far away for me to care for, but they have questions. And they're like, I just need to check in. Should I panic about this, or should I be okay? I'm like, yes, if you need to do some consulting, we can do that.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll put it in the show notes as well and give you information. Thank you so much for being here. We definitely appreciate it.
Yes,
and
I love coming and chatting about my job.
I was going to say, we will do this again.
Love
so thank you.